As you guys can see from the graphics on your screen, President Trump has deployed a lot of naval firepower and marines near Venezuela. This region is heating up very quickly and not a lot of people are paying close attention. We have USS Lake Erie guided missile cruiser, we have USS Samson guided missile destroyer, USS Gravely guided missile destroyer, USS Jason Dunham guided missile destroyer, and USS Newport News fast attack submarine. On top of this, we have many drones, more air assets, and other assets from the Coast Guard. And not to forget, around 3,000 Marines. Now, Maduro is using all this buildup to rile up Venezuelan citizens who are still on his side, as you guys saw in the intro. But many people are not realizing why US is putting so much firepower in this region. And the reason behind this is simple. Maduro is one of the biggest drug trafficker in the world, and those drugs are flowing into United States and flowing into Europe. That's why, to learn more about this, I decided to talk to someone who knows a lot more about Venezuela than all of us. And my questions were simple. How long has Venezuela been doing this, and will they stop? Let's listen to that conversation. Now, President Trump has been putting pressure on the Maduro regime ever since he got in office. It's not just about the warships. He also increased sanctions on Venezuela. On top of that, he put a $50 million bounty on Maduro's head itself. So how is Maduro reacting to all this, and how weak is his regime?
Yeah, so I mean, the ability of Maduro and the Venezuelan regime to resist pressure shouldn't be underestimated, right? Chavismo has been in power for 26 years. That's for a reason. They built a totalitarian state that controls every aspect, every part of society. We're talking that Maduro himself, he took power in 2013. Chavez took power, and he was also a dictator. This is important to say. He took power in 1999, he won an election, and then he built a regime, a totalitarian state, that after he passed away, Maduro took power in 2013. So he has survived massive protests, 2014, 2017, 2019, even 2024, 2025, we have seen protests as well. He has survived economic sanctions and even military uprisings. Specifically in April 30, 2019. So he managed last year to steal an election, even though he only had support of 30% of the Venezuelan population. But today the situation looks a little bit different. It looks like at least this pressure is a type of pressure that Maduro and Venezuela have never seen before. You know, we're talking about Axios actually was reporting that we have never seen or the US has never been this close to being a direct conflict with Venezuela. And of course, that says a lot of what's going on. We're talking about 3 destroyers, 1 aircraft carrier, 1 nuclear submarine. And this actually costs money, around $13 billion to mobilize these equipments to try to fight the cartels. So is the Maduro regime strong? Yes, it is. It's controlled by the armies. It's a narco state. The reason why they're still in power is not because they have the consent of the Venezuelan people, but because they have managed to build a totalitarian state where if you speak out against the regime, you go to prison or you can be killed. They control social media. If you tweet something that they dislike, they go after you. Just having this conversation, the conversation that you and I are having right now, if we were in Venezuela, we both would be at risk. If I were in Venezuela, I would be in prison, but we can talk about this a little bit later. I have a cousin who went to prison. So they created a huge, big government totalitarian state that doesn't allow individual liberties, that doesn't allow individual freedom, and that is only sustained by force. So the actions that the Trump administration and the U.S. government has been implementing and in the last few days are diplomatic sanctions, economic sanctions, political pressure, but even military movements are a new episode or a new chapter in this conflict that is so particular, that is so important, But we need to understand and we need to realize that sadly the Maduro regime is actually very strong. Is he sleeping better today than a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago? No, he's not. Actually, the US government is offering $50 million for information that can lead to his arrest. Of course, that creates incentives around for people around Maduro to betray him. And that doesn't make him feel comfortable. But at the same time, we need to realize that it's not gonna be easy, to have freedom in Venezuela, to try to have a regime change. It's not going to be easy because Maduro, in fact, has managed to deal with other difficult situations in the past. Not as difficult as this one, but for sure difficult.
And yes, we'll get into your story because as someone who has only lived in democracies, what little bit I do know about you, it was truly shocking. So I think the audience would love to know about that. But before we get to that, you talked about how Maduro has gone through difficult situations. And in 2019, there was a coup attempt. And based on what I have read, it seems like he was very close to losing power. And on this channel, we follow Russia, China a lot. We've been following the Russian invasion. And maybe I'm incorrect and you can correct me, but Putin played a big role in keeping Maduro in power in 2019. If you know anything about that, could you share that with the audience? Now, before we get into the answer, just a quick reminder for everyone to hit that subscribe button down below. As the channel grows, it makes it possible for us to get more expert guests like this one so you guys can get most accurate information. Now, let's get into the answer.
Yes, 100%. So Russia is, it's funny because leftists and even some people on the right are very against U.S. intervention, whatever that means, because it could mean different things at the same time, depending on who is criticizing or supporting that statement. They always say, leave Venezuela alone. The U.S. is always intervening on these countries, but they never talk about Chinese intervention. They never talk about Russian intervention, which is, of course, for the nature that those regimes have, very dangerous, not just for South America, not just for countries like Venezuela, but even for the US. Imagine how dangerous it is for the US to have a country that is a dictatorship, that is a narco state, and that has Russian intelligence just 3,000 miles away from Florida, just in your backyard, So yes, Russia is deeply involved in Venezuela. Iran is as well. China is as well. So enemies of the United States are collaborating with the Maduro regime. In what way? At least with Russia. Well, Russian companies have invested in Venezuela and oil. Venezuela has received military equipment from Russia. Venezuela has received Russian intelligence and strategic intelligence over the last 2 decades. So we're talking about an actual intervention from Russia in Venezuela that, of course, has bad intentions. Just in May this year, May 2025, Russia and Venezuela signed a partnership contract. So it's more important than ever, especially for the conflict that we have in Eastern Europe, for the US to understand that this is our area of influence. And the US shouldn't allow Russia to intervene in Venezuela and to have the power and control that they currently have. And it's not just Russia, as I mentioned, it's also China, for example. China has lent to Venezuela over $60 billion over the last years. And money that Venezuela gives back to China, not through cash or actual money, but to oil. To imagine how important it is Venezuela to Russia. So if we want the US to be stronger, if we actually believe in Western values, if we understand that even though we don't have a perfect system or a perfect government, we are way better than the system that Russia has or what China promotes, it is important also for us to understand that we should dominate this area, this region. And for those who are listening to me that right now would probably accuse me of being a neocon or that I've been asking for U.S. intervention, I think it's in the U.S. interest, not from a perspective of self-sacrifice, to find a solution in Venezuela. If you want a safer United States of America, if you want a safer Western Hemisphere, of course you need to try to neutralize a regime that is a narco state and that is collaborating with your biggest enemies.
That makes sense. And now, I don't know if I know we had some reports that Russia may be providing Venezuela with their new missile, if it's the Oresting missile, but it seems that may not be true. But I wonder if you have any other information about if Russia is providing any increased support to Venezuela since President Trump has gotten in office.
Yeah, so it's a rumor. It's not being confirmed, but I wouldn't be surprised. Russia, and not just now under Putin, even the Soviet Union. We know the ties they had with Cuba. Uh, they're actually very dangerous, but they're also very smart. In fact, that's why they are dangerous. They understand that by having allies in this part of the world, in this region, it's a way to show strength. It's a way to show force against the United States. And a mistake I think we have made, or that the United States, both parties sometimes have made, is underestimating the impact that that could have. Um, again, it's not just about drugs, which is a huge part. It's not just about criminal organizations like Tren de Aragua, who is right now in the United States and has killed American citizens. We're even talking about intelligence. Imagine in a future conflict, if it were to happen, having 3,000 miles away from you, or 90 miles away, when we talk about Cuba, a country that is an ally of your biggest enemies. So I do not really have that information to confirm, but what I could tell you is that for sure Russia has sent equipment, military equipment to Venezuela. They also have sent monies. Russian companies are involved with Venezuelan oil. They have also helped with intelligence. So yes, when we're talking about Venezuela and fighting for freedom, we're talking about the U.S. interest to try to keep your biggest enemies out of your region.
For sure. And I think many people also forget that Puerto Rico, U.S. territory, that's actually where the warships went to Venezuela. Like, they went to the coast, they went from Puerto Rico, we have a base there. And that's the territory that Maduro has threatened just a few months ago, where he was like, he wanted to invade Puerto Rico.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. He said he wanted. Look, so crazy, right? Because there are so many things that he says and so many things happening around the world that I had actually forgotten about that. But right after the election in 2024, in July, it was probably in August or September, he did say that he wanted to. He didn't say invade, of course. He said he wanted to free Puerto Rico from U.S. intervention. So I think back then the Biden administration probably underestimated those statements. But actually, we shouldn't underestimate the Venezuelan regime. It has also been proven, because people think about Venezuela and they think, well, people are starving, they're poor, therefore the government is also poor. They're not actually a threat to us. Well, Venezuelans might be starving on the streets, but the government manages the biggest reserves, the biggest oil reserves. They're also a narco state that just last year, as I said, got $8 billion just through cocaine and drug trafficking. So it's been proven and studied and investigated that the Venezuelan regime has supported political parties around the world. Leftists, very radical left-wing political parties around the world, like in Spain, Colombia, or Mexico. So I really think, and actually the State Department has been investigated this, and they also confirmed it, Maduro sent criminals over the United States. So Maduro is not like, I'm killing Venezuelans and I'm, thirsty for power, just leave me alone. No, actually, the Venezuelan regime has a huge intention to go after other countries, other political system, and trying to change or at least cause harm in those areas, in those places.
For sure. And since we're talking about Maduro regime's treatment of their own citizens, you were born in the country, right? You were actually a medical student in the country trying to become a doctor. And you faced an interesting choice where they did not want you taking the Hippocratic Oath as doctors around the world take. They wanted you to take an oath to the party or something like that. Maybe you can share that story.
Yes, I was born and raised in Venezuela, right? That's why I have this accent. I actually moved to the US and I learned English later on. But I first came to the US on vacation, just on vacation, when I was 6. Things in Venezuela were getting bad. Not as bad as they are right now. And my parents, through hard, honest work, they, basically managed to take my brother and I on a vacation that is the dream of any kid. We went to Orlando, I visited Disney, and it was amazing. And I'm talking about that trip because it was my first time in the US and it changed my life entirely. I was a kid, I didn't know anything about politics, I didn't know anything about economics. I just knew I was witnessing something remarkable. I knew this country had something, freedom. Maybe I didn't really know the term, but people were doing something different that was working. So I got obsessed. Why is the United States successful? Venezuela is not successful. I want my country to be as successful as the US. I want to try to do something. So when I was a teenager, I started to, read more. I put my eyes on everything I could find. I read John Locke, Milton Friedman, Ayn Rand, Mises. I explored, conservative libertarian ideas about freedom. I read the Declaration of Independence, analysis and studies about the US Constitution. And I was still in Venezuela, right? So I decided to do political activism. And I did, many things that you could imagine. I led political protests. I gave speeches in multiple colleges and universities. One speech was actually called Defending Capitalism, where I would explore why free markets ideas work and how it improves or increases individual liberty. But that came with a cost. So at that moment, at the same time, even though it was a very different theme from politics, I was in med school. I wanted to become a doctor. And I had some debates with professors before I took some risk. If we're talking about public education, if you want to become a doctor in Venezuela, you must go to public schools. There are not private universities for med school. So I debated professors in the past. I had some issues, some problems. Of course, they didn't like me because of my ideas and because I was someone always willing to speak out. But one day, there was the director of the medical school in my college gave a talk, basically, in where he was talking about politics. He was supporting the government. He was defending socialist ideas. And at the same time, he said that when we graduate, he wanted to change it. He wanted to change the oath that doctors have to make. And he said that he was actually going to work on that because talking to the students, talking to us, you guys need to make a socialist oath instead of a Hippocratic oath. And of course, I raised my hand. I debated him. I said that was a terrible and horrible idea, that actually the fact that the classroom looks so bad and so terrible is through the public education system in Venezuela, the fact that you cannot speak freely. Right now, doctors are going to prison just for reporting the level of crisis that they are getting when kids are dying from starvation. So I started to debate him and talking about politics, and he immediately stopped and he said, "You're expelled from college." So he took me to his office where he said, "This is a socialist and Chavista university. If you don't like it, go to Harvard." Of course, being completely and totally sarcastic with me. And he actually sent the National Guard to go after me if I didn't leave his office. He said, "I'm going to call the National Guard right now." And I left his office. And days later, my case became viral because students were talking about it. And Maria Corina Machado, I don't know if you know her or your audience, but she's the leader of the Venezuelan opposition. I used to work with her in Venezuela. So she posted a picture about my case. She spoke about my case. So my case went super completely viral. And the government spoke about it. Actually, they talked about it in Congress as well. And they said, yes, we expelled Franklin Camargo. But the reason why we did it is because he's a terrorist. The reason why we did it is because he wanted to set our classrooms on fire. He wanted to attack our professors. He wanted to attack our students. Just because I debated the idea of, making a socialist oath. So, there were very difficult times. I received advice from very important people to leave the country as soon as possible because I could be detained. In fact, my cousin had been in prison for 3 years for political reasons. So I came to the United States of America. So it was a very crazy story. but it's not even close to be the worst. In Venezuela, actually, mine had a happy ending. Venezuelans right now are dealing with an actual very dangerous monster. A government that goes after you if you make a shirt and you try to sell it that has a political message against the government. A government that goes after you if you tweet a meme that jokes about Maduro. So we are dealing with a real totalitarian government. And when I talk about the importance that the United States should have to try to stop this regime, I'm not saying it because I want to see the country was born and raised free. Just I don't say it just because of that. As you can tell, I actually have deeply love for America. I have assimilated to the culture and to the system. And actually, my allegiance right now is to the United States that opened its doors for me and it gave me freedom, right? And that's why I actually support maximum pressure on the Maduro regime, because I understand that the US is going to be better off. Really, American lives are going to be better off if there is a regime change in Venezuela, if there is freedom in Venezuela. I truly, truly believe that.
Well, we're glad to see that you're safe and you're speaking out against the Venezuelan regime. And I know you want to talk about the New York mayoral election. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. And you're seeing one of the Democratic candidates, Zoran Mamdani, and you think some of the policies, like the supermarket that he wants government run, are not right. So maybe you can share what you see and what warning you have for the audience.
Yes, Zoran Mamdani, he won the primary in New York City, so he is very likely to become the next mayor. Now, let me start with this. He probably is not going to destroy New York entirely because we're talking about a very iconic city. He's not going to destroy the country because he's just going to be a mayor. He's going to have limited power. However, what is really dangerous about his figure is not just that he's going to cause issues and he's going to decrease the quality of life of New Yorkers, but he's building and created a political movement that is normalizing the most dangerous anti-American immoral ideas that you could ever imagine. So he's talking about, he has even spoken in favor of seizing the means of production, nationalizing the means of production. Chavez talked about it as well in Venezuela, and he did it. It's very dangerous, it's totalitarian, it goes against property rights, and it doesn't work. It doesn't deliver prosperity. He's talking about freezing rent control. He wants to control prices. That doesn't work either. If you want prices to go down, you need to build more. You need to create incentives for private companies, private corporations to build more, so you have it helps, of course, the supply and demand, and people can afford housing. You need to try to control inflation by spending more, by producing more, by spending less, by producing more. So that's the policies you need to do. But he's promising freezing rent prices, which would destroy the construction industry. And that also happened in Venezuela. He wants to build public housing. You don't want the government to build houses. That's not the responsibility of the government. The responsibility of the government is to make it as easy as possible for private entities to build housing. When the government builds houses, the quality is not going to be good. They're going to spend a lot of money, and at the end, they're just going to give you a house if you support the government. That also happened in Venezuela. So the government cannot even run a DMV, not efficiently. Why would you want the government to run a grocery store? That's also a very dangerous idea. So we always say, and I think even left and right, we don't trust politicians. We don't trust the government. They are corrupt. They are not for the people. Okay, why do you want to give politicians the power to feed you? Why do you want politicians the power to provide housing, to cover your basic needs? If you actually want to cover your basic needs, you want a government that is as little as possible and that creates the environment that provides you the freedom to work for your own thing. So is Mamdani a socialist? Yes, he is. He's proposing socialist policies. Is he proposing the same things that were applied in Venezuela? Yes, he is. Because Venezuela is a totalitarian government, which is very moral. But the reason why people are starving to death is not just because there is no freedom of speech. I love freedom of speech. To me, it's indispensable for a free society. And it doesn't matter if the economy is good or bad, we need free speech. But the reason why kids are starving is not because of lack of free speech. It's because of lack of opportunities. It's because of inflation. It's because of lack of food. It's because of scarcity. And that was created by socialist policies. And I'm saying this and making this distinction because sometimes people just assume that, yeah, everything that collapses is just, lack of freedom of speech. No, freedom of speech is probably the most important freedom, but socialist policies were in fact applied in Venezuela. And another thing, Mandani has talked about taxing the rich, and billionaires shouldn't exist. That sounds good to some people. Maybe you are young, you cannot afford housing right now, you have student loans, and you feel pessimistic about the future, and you have reasons to feel pessimistic about the future. But the reasons why things are not going in the right direction is not because of lack of free markets. It's not because of too much free markets. It's not because of the government is too small. No, it's actually because over the years, the United States and New York specifically has built a huge welfare state that make it harder, and also a tax code that makes it harder for investments to create value, to produce value, and has such a regulated system where the government is so big that is making it harder for everyone. So he's saying that billionaires shouldn't exist. That sounds good to some people. But if you took all wealth today, if you took all wealth from billionaires, you would only be able to cover the US federal budget for less than a year. So it might sound good that, billionaires shouldn't exist, it's going to make your life better, but in fact, it wouldn't make your life better. So yes, when Mandani is a socialist, he's promoting the same policies that Chavez is promoting. He might not be a narco. It's going to create a super totalitarian state necessarily. However, his policies would for sure destroy the New York City economy. He might not be able to do it because his power is going to be limited, but the fact that he's creating a political movement that says it's fine, billionaires shouldn't exist, we need to nationalize the means of production, we need to go after businesses, we need to freeze rent prices. That fact itself is very dangerous, and we need to fight against it because it's not just Venezuela. It was also East Germany, it was North Korea, it was Mao's China, it was Cuba, it was North Korea. The contract is there. Free market economies are 10 times richer than socialist economies, GDP per capita. Venezuela went from being the fourth largest economy in the 1950s to be right now, or to have right now, the largest refugee crisis in the Western hemisphere. So what we need to do is embrace freedom. We need to embrace American values. We need to embrace capitalism. We need to embrace free markets, free enterprise, and we need to fight against collectivist socialist ideas that want to destroy America and they want to destroy our freedoms, because that's another thing. Socialism goes against individual freedom because it's a doctrine, it's a political philosophy that pursues equality over freedom. And, you and I, Sam, we're different. We have different backgrounds. We have different dreams. We probably disagree on some things, and that's fine. And we're going to make different decisions. If we are different and we have freedom, we're going to have different outcomes. And that is fine. Different outcomes itself is not bad. What is bad is poverty. And if you want to fight poverty, what you need is freedom. You need capitalism.
For sure. And a lot of people who are not from Texas, especially someone who is from Texas, look at Austin, where over the last year, the rent prices are down 20% just because the government is approving more buildings, more condos, and supply is increasing, prices are coming down. Even here in Houston, not as much as Austin, but it's happening. And
yeah, supply and demand. It's very basic, actually. It's more basic and easy than what people actually think.
For sure. And I thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing all the information you have. And I'll link your Twitter down below. Anything else you want us to link so the audience can find you?
My Instagram account, I'm very, very, very active there too. And well, thank you, Sam. My pleasure.
And hope you have a good day.
You too. Thank you.
If you're worried about how AI is changing everything, jobs, industries, education, even the economy, you're not alone. According to a Rutgers University report, 7 in 10 US workers say they're very or somewhat worried about employers using AI. 3 in 10 are worried about their job being eliminated altogether. Even experts agree with this feeling. Many studies have shown that by 2030s, 30% of all jobs will be automated by AI and 44% of workers will be replaced. That's why you have to pay attention if you want to avoid becoming a victim. This is exactly why I recently made a YouTube video that breaks down exactly what's happening behind the scenes and how people are preparing, not just to survive, but to benefit from the AI revolution. This is not about becoming a coder or building the next ChatGPT. It's about understanding where the real leverage is as AI evolves and how normal people are using it to build a safer career path right now. If you're feeling uncertain about the future or you're just curious about what your options are, watch that video here on YouTube by clicking the link in the description or card on your screen.